The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Frankly Speaking. I'm your host today, Frank Zabarick, and I'm really excited. I guess when I started my show about 4 or 5 years ago, I had sort of a bucket list of like different topics I definitely want to cover. And I've always been fascinated by the legal profession, lawyers, and I want to have a lawyer on the show to talk about some of their stereotypes and misconceptions about the legal profession, about courts and stuff like that. And I'm really blessed to have with me a gentleman from my church who happens to be a lawyer, Tom Walker. And your specialty is contract law?
That's correct.
Okay. So before we really get into this, why don't you tell my audience a little bit about yourself? You're with the firm Niederman, Stanzel, and Lindsey PLLC of Manchester.
Correct.
Now, your specialty is contract law. Is this law firm 100% contract law, or do they specialize in other aspects of the law?
Well, it's contract law, but it's focused really on collections. So whenever you have somebody that borrows money for any reason, a credit card, car loan, whatever, and they don't pay it, creditors hire my firm to enforce that contract and to collect the money for them.
Oh, okay. That's pretty clear cut and simple.
Yep, that's the short version of it.
Okay. And now, how did you become? Did you always want to become a lawyer, or?
Yeah, I'm a native New Hampshireite. I grew up here all my life. I grew up in northern New Hampshire, actually. But from a young age, I wanted to become a lawyer. I went to college and had all intentions of going to law school right out of college, and the Lord had other things for me, wanted to teach me some other lessons. So I ended up going to law school later in life. I started working at Niederman, Stanzel, and Lindsey as a paralegal. And I worked there for 10 years as a paralegal, went to law school at night. And after that was completed, I took the bar exams and was a practicing attorney.
Wow. Oh, okay. So when you were a practicing attorney, you've always been in what they call contract law.
Yes. Yep. That's what we do as far as enforcing those contracts to help creditors collect debts that are owed to them. So we do stuff on the commercial side, business versus business usually, and we also do some consumer stuff, which is just an individual who's borrowed money from a bank or has a credit card or whatever.
Okay, so let's say, 10 years, 10, 15 years from now, you want to spread your wings or something like that and become a general practitioner or whatever they call that, a lawyer who dabbles a little bit in everything. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't have to take the bar exam again, would you?
No. The interesting thing about the bar exam, it's kind of, you pass it one time and you're done, except that the state requires you to do what's called continuing legal education credits. You need to do 12 credits a year, and you need to report them to the state to keep your license up to date. So they want you to be on top of any new developments in the law. You can do that through classes that they offer. You can do that through online videos that third-party entities offer. So yeah, there's still some learning. And you have to have that documented in order to keep your license up to date. But as far as taking the bar exam, No, I'm all done with that.
And just to clarify, you told me earlier you're licensed to practice in both New Hampshire and Massachusetts, correct?
Correct. I went to law school in Massachusetts. The school's called Massachusetts School of Law, and they offered a nighttime program, so I was able to work during the day at the law firm as a paralegal, and then go to law school at night. And I had to take the Massachusetts exam first, the bar exam first, so that it's only offered twice a year, July and February. So I took the Massachusetts bar exam in July after I graduated, and when I passed it, I applied for the New Hampshire bar, which was offered in February, and so I took that and passed that as well. Now, I could have waited 5 years, could have practiced 5 years in Massachusetts, and then what they call waive in to New Hampshire, but I only ever wanted to practice in New Hampshire, so I jumped through those hoops to make sure I could do both.
Is it, no, your partners at Niederman, Stanzel, and Lindsey, are they all licensed for Massachusetts and New Hampshire?
Attorney Lindsey, Kristen Lindsey, is, she went to the same law school as I did, actually, just a few years before me. So she's licensed in both states. Attorney Niederman, who founded the firm, he was licensed in New Jersey before he came up here to New Hampshire. And but we don't really do anything in Massachusetts or New Jersey. It's a pretty easy requirement to keep your certifications up to date in multiple states. So we do it, and I've done about 3 cases in Massachusetts over the years.
Okay. No, I knew a handful. Well, I knew there were Massachusetts attorneys that also were licensed in Florida, because a lot of people, like in New Hampshire and Massachusetts, like to do their wintering in Florida.
Right. I know a few people that do that as well. And once you practice for 5 years, I think in most states, if you kind of fill out the form and pay the fee, you can what they call waive in or be qualified to practice in that state as well. So
okay.
5 years is kind of the magic number. But when I was just graduated from law school, I needed to take the 2 bar exams back to back. I didn't want to wait the 5 years.
No, okay, no, let's get into my questions here, the nitty gritty here. Lawyers who offer a free consultation or a 30-minute free consultation. I mean, I can understand how somebody who just passed the bar and wants to get a reputation for themselves, build a reputation and build like clients would do that. A person who's been like 10 years or over, is that worth it, a lawyer, or might that indicate they're having problems with their practice?
No, I think that's a pretty standard practice. So we would do the same in our office. We get a lot of cases from out of state from a lot of well-known clients. So, but we do get people that come in off the street asking us to, hey, I've got this case. Is it something that you're interested in? And we'll meet with them. I think for a lot of attorneys, especially like personal injury and workers' compensation and some of that nature, it's a way for them to generate business. You get the people to come in, it doesn't cost them anything, and you get to interview them, you get to get a flavor for what their case is about, and you figure out whether it's something that you can actually do. And I mean, attorneys only want to take a case that they can win, right? And if it's something that's over their head, they're not going to want to do it. But also, it's a way to get good cases. Sometimes you get people with significant damages, and those are the type of cases that you want to get the big jury verdict to try to get that big judgment. So yeah, it's standard practice in the state. I don't think you can really say that it's a good, or it shows whether the attorney is good or bad. I just think that it's a normal part of the practice.
Okay. Talking about normal parts of practice that may or may not break a lawyer, is there a stigma amongst lawyers that they try to avoid at all cost court-appointed cases?
So I'll make this distinction. So in the court system, there's really 2 types of cases. There's usually criminal cases and civil cases. So I do civil type cases. I sue people for money damages. That's on the civil side of things. So I think what you're talking about is a lot of the criminal type cases. But on criminal cases, there is a constitutional right to a trial and for court-appointed counsel if you can't afford it. So that's a constitutional right. So I've met in my time as an attorney, I've met a lot of public defenders, and they're very nice people. They work hard. They don't get paid a lot of money, but they're paid for by the state, and they believe that they part of what they want to do is to make sure that people's rights are protected, and that the police are doing the right thing, that the people aren't being railroaded, that the witnesses are actually saw what they say they saw, that type thing. The other side, on the civil side for what I do, is called the pro bono side. So that's a free, I think it's Latin for free to the public or for the public, maybe something like that. And so you can get pro bono cases. You take them for nothing. You can sign up through the bar association to get these cases. And so you help low-income or poor people with whatever. It might be fighting a foreclosure, or maybe helping out with a divorce, or maybe they're poor and they need to go through the bankruptcy court. So you can sign up for those type of cases. And it's an interesting thing. I don't do any pro bono stuff on my own. And as far as the criminal side, court-appointed attorneys, in the old days, I think attorneys used to be, they could be tapped on the shoulder by the judge and say, hey, you need to go represent these people. But I don't think they do that anymore, at least not in New Hampshire that I've seen. But pro bono is voluntary. You can do it if you want. The Bar Association wants you to do it because it's a good it's a good community way to help the community. But
a good way to help the community, but there's no way you could write that off on your taxes or anything like that.
I don't really know much about that, whether they do that or not. But I have some people that I do know that do a lot of pro bono stuff. They actually view it as a way to generate business maybe in the future. So when you help when you help this person now, you become their attorney. And so if something happens in their family, there's a slip and fall or a workers' compensation thing where they need help, they'll come back to you and say, hey, I've got this really big problem. Can you help me with it? And then maybe they earn a fee on it later on. But
now, on the criminal side that you mentioned, that again, they don't probably make the hourly rate like you would or something like that, or the annual rate. Are they good attorneys? Are they mostly kids, people who just passed the bar exam?
I would say generally they can be younger people that are trying to get experience working for the county or for the state as a public defender. But there's a lot of experienced people out there, very excellent attorneys that are public defenders, and they're in court a lot, and they're protecting people's rights, and that's why they're there.
Okay. And well, one thing I'm going to ask you, just out of morbid curiosity here, when you were going through law school, Tom, did you ever take a requirement or an elective called Courtroom Strategy 101? Specifically, did they give you one-on-one instructions on when to say, objection, Your Honor, and saying that over and over again where your opposite counsel can't get a sentence out?
Well, so yes, I mean, so the neat thing about Massachusetts School of Law was that a lot of the professors were practicing attorneys. So a lot of the classes I had were professors that had actually done this in court. So I feel like we had a good we had good teachers to teach us the right way to do things in court. Now, I knew that I was going to be doing a lot of stuff in court, so I actually signed up for the moot court program. So we actually we prepared for several months, did a competition, and me and three other people, it was four of us total, and was supervised by two of the professors who were in court a lot as well. And they taught us some of these fine points, how to act in court, when to object, when not to object. So I felt I was very, very well prepared for the real world, if you want to say it like that. Some of the stuff you see on TV and in movies and stuff, I think they exaggerate that a little bit. So I don't know if that's where you're going with that, but it's so yeah, to stand up and just start yelling at the judge or to cut the other guy off for the sake of cutting him off. There's reasons to do that. Sometimes you don't want to get the information out there. The jury could be hearing this statement or this question, and you need to cut them off to make sure they don't hear it. Yeah, I think if you go overboard, I think it can be troublesome for you. But I think if there's a valid reason for it, I think it's fine.
I would assume that there's probably a lot of like brilliant students who go through that become law students, pass the bar and everything like that. They have good head knowledge of what the laws are all about. But if they don't have the courtroom savvy and they can't sway a judge or jury, they probably have very short tenures as lawyers.
Well, there's a lot of jobs for lawyers that are not necessarily going to court all the time. Now, I'm in court all the time. My firm, I was telling you before we came in, my firm files cases all across the state. My firm, me and Attorney Stanzel especially, we're probably some of the only attorneys that have been to every single courthouse in this state.
Oh.
So that's what I do. That's what I like to do. But there are a lot of attorneys that work in like corporate type settings or work for the state doing investigative stuff that they're not in court a lot. Doesn't mean they're not smart or intelligent or anything like that. It's just a different facet of what the practice is. So I like going to court. It gets me out of the office a little bit. And I like dealing with people. I like being in front of the judge. I like presenting my case. I like making the argument. I'm a competitive person at heart, so I'd like to win. But just because someone doesn't go to court all the time doesn't mean they're any worse of an attorney. Or it just means they're doing something different.
Okay. No, I want to get into a little bit about like how people pick. Usually, how they pick a good attorney to represent them for a certain case. Right. And I think probably the best way of doing it is word of mouth from like a relative, a friend, a coworker, or somebody like that you really trust and could prod you in the right direction.
Well, just like in real life, if you have a good experience with somebody, you tell people about it. Yeah. And if you have a bad experience with somebody, you tell people about it too. Yeah. So, listen, there's obviously attorneys have websites, so you can figure out pretty quickly in a Google search, what attorneys specialize in what. Yeah. You also, I'm not super familiar with Yelp and some of those other ones, but I think there are some attorney reviews on there as well. Believe it or not, Better Business Bureau. I think
I never even thought of them.
I think they'll tell you at least the bad ones. People that have had complaints filed against them. So, but yeah, it's such a specialized practice. In other words, it's very hard to be a general practitioner, someone that does a little bit of everything, because there's so many rules and regulations, both federal and state. That even in my part of the law. I have to know not only the federal and state stuff, but sometimes even the individual rules at different courts. Sometimes they can be a little bit different. So, it's
one of the things I like on the social media or regular lawyers ads, like in newspapers or something like that, is when they promote their cases. Previous cases, along with the outcomes that went favorable for their clients. Mm-hmm. And I would say if they could list about a half a dozen cases and outcomes, half a dozen to a dozen. But even then, I'd like to check out, to make sure the lawyer's not, pulling the wool over my eyes, check out 2 or 3 of them myself.
Yeah.
Now, if I went to court, I'd have to go to the court clerk, I guess, and physically take out like I was taking out library books or something like that. I says, I want to take out these 3 cases. But somebody like yourself, you probably have like a password or a code or something like that to all the courts in New Hampshire, and you can probably plug in with your password that. Could a regular schmuck like me get into like a, I don't know, like the New Hampshire District Court
Well, so
on the internet?
so yes, I do have a top secret password. The attorneys in New Hampshire have what's called CaseMaker available to them.
All right.
And all that is that it gives me access to all the published cases in New Hampshire and actually in all 50 states, and also in the federal system. So it's a very large database, and I can look up statutes. I can look up court rules in wherever, Nebraska, wherever I want to. If I think it's important, I could look it up. So I do have access to that. In New Hampshire, the only cases that are published are the New Hampshire Supreme Court cases, and I guess I have not done it outside of this CaseMaker program that I was telling you about. But I think that if you Googled a certain name or fact pattern, my guess is that some third parties print these, publicize these cases as well. So you probably would have access to that indirectly. The only other thing would be to go to the library, and if they have a set of books that have the cases in them. Every year, a book is printed with all the cases for that year decided by the Supreme Court. So you could look it up manually that way. A lot of the stuff in district court and superior court, those cases are usually unpublished, although I have seen in rare circumstances, I think a LexisNexis type situation where, once again, you have to have a special subscription and password. But yeah, it would be harder to find cases on your own, especially if they're haven't gone all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Fortunately, most of my stuff stays below the Supreme Court.
But usually the court clerks are very, very helpful on stuff like that. You want to look up this lawsuit, Smith and Commonwealth versus Smith, or New Hampshire versus Smith, or something like that.
All that stuff is public record. So if it's a paper file, they can actually pull the paper file for you, assuming that it's public record. Sometimes records can be sealed, you know what I mean, depending on the type of case it is. But I find the clerks very helpful. Don't take too much advantage of them. They're busy. They have a lot of work to do. But if you knew exactly what you were looking for.
No, if it's a thick file, is the verdict or outcome and then easily put in place, like right on top of the file when you open it up?
A lot of it is chronological. So in a paper file. So I don't know.
On the very bottom one.
So sometimes it's tabbed. So yeah, actually there'll be pleadings that are filed beforehand, and then whatever the trial decision would be might even be somewhere in the middle. So to answer your question,
so the clerk might say,
the clerk could probably help you
where's the
find
verdict here? What happened in this? And
right,
they can dig it up.
Yep.
Usually.
Yep.
Okay. So moving right along. Does a person need a lawyer to do a will? And what makes a will legally binding?
That's an interesting question because all of us at some point are going to die, or our spouse is going to die, or our parents are going to die. And so wills are very important documents. So to answer your question, do you need an attorney? Technically not. I don't specialize in wills and estates and trusts and that thing, but I have done several wills for people in the past, for my family and for some pastoral people and some for needy people in my church. I guess that would be kind of a pro bono type thing, where they need help to get some of their final affairs situated. There are very strict rules about making a will and for it to be legal in the eyes of the court. So in New Hampshire follows what's called the Uniform Probate Code. So it's most of the states have adopted this set of rules that that all states need to follow, or most states need to follow too. So every state recognizes what the other state's doing. So in New Hampshire, to have a self-proving will, you need to have 2 witnesses. Those 2 witnesses can't be in the will.
Right.
So if you're, if you're giving all your assets to your kids can't be the witnesses to the will.
Okay.
And it makes sense.
Yeah.
I think the law calls it disinterested witnesses. And then you need to have a notary. And the notary is there just to say, listen, these people are who they say they are. And basically also to be able to testify, if needed, that the person was of sound mind who's making that will. So technically, no, you wouldn't need an attorney to do that. But I would say if you had anything especially complicated, like if you had a lot of assets or a lot of things that you needed to divide, I'd have an attorney look at it. Highly recommend that. If you had any questions or concerns, definitely consult somebody, because you don't want something to be done and not done properly and then create other problems for your loved ones later on after you pass away.
And that's the one thing you really can't check on after you pass away, that, it's all messed up. And
a will is not something either. If you have a lot of assets, I mean, you may want to talk to an estate planning attorney to do trusts or to help move assets around or whatever, because there's lots of issues, lots of laws, both federal, like taxation type laws, that have to be dealt with as well. So, as far as talking to you today, it's hard to give everyone a complete picture of but it can be complicated. And it's always better to err on the side of caution. The few $100s to do that,
Amen, yeah,
might save your family a few thousand later on to try to fix it in court.
I agree. Okay, now what about people, if a person's going to close on a house, whether they're buying or selling a home, and they got somebody like Century 21, which is a fairly reputable real estate company, do they really need a lawyer for the closing?
So I gave this some thought when you mentioned this as a topic, and I just recently bought and sold a house like 2 years ago. So this is a new experience for me. Now I'm an attorney, so so most people are like, this isn't a big deal, but I'll tell you that that the banks have their own attorneys. So if you're purchasing a house and you're going through a bank to do that, they will have their own battery of attorneys there to check the title, because you have to prove clear title. They're going to be checking the appraisal, making sure you're not getting ripped off. They're going to prepare the new deed to make sure that they can show ownership of that. So even though the bank is doing that, those are the same things that you would want to have done. So even though the bank's attorneys don't directly represent you, they are indirectly representing your interests, because your interests are the same as the bank's. So hopefully I explained that well enough. But the other thing is that the bank is also going to be preparing the loan documents to pay that money back. So if you have any questions, if you think that paperwork is too complicated or whatever, you can hire an attorney, sometimes for a flat fee or for an hourly rate, to help you review and explain that stuff to you. I'm pretty familiar with contracts and stuff, so I didn't have much of a problem. It was all pretty much the same stuff that I deal with on a daily basis. So I explained it a little bit to my wife as we signed away for a long-term mortgage. So, but yeah, when you have any questions like that, you should hire, because the bank is under no obligation. The bank's attorney is under no obligation. They don't have any what's called fiduciary duty to directly help you.
And the same with Century 21. They're all for their real estate agents and...
Yeah, I had a realtor in my situation, a friend of mine who I trusted. So he helped me through a lot of the purchase and sale type paperwork, and felt that he really knew what he was doing. You could hire an attorney that specializes in that stuff as well. But I figured between a friend of mine who'd been in the business for 20 years and myself, being able to read and dissect the documents a little bit, I figured I didn't go and hire someone who specializes in that. So Yeah, that's kind of a tricky question too. I would say if you're borrowing the money, the bank's attorneys would probably be okay. If you are selling property, you're buying or selling property, and there is no loan, like it's a cash deal, so deeds have to be drawn up and whatnot, I would hire an attorney to do that. You need to have certain language in there. You need to have certain property descriptions. You need to make sure the stuff is properly recorded. So there's things there that an attorney can really help you with.
Ah, okay. Okay, so moving right along, do you foresee polygraph test, lie detector test, ever becoming admissible in court sometime during your career?
So I'll give you, once again, I don't do criminal stuff.
Okay.
So I'll kind of give you the law school answer, at least as I remember it. Lie detectors are still considered to be fairly inaccurate, especially in a court of law. So I think there was some cases back even as late as the 1990s where the United States Supreme Court said, it's too big of a risk that if someone happens to give a false positive on a polygraph, that maybe they go to jail for a long time or be incarcerated for a significant period of time and lose your liberty because of a machine that might be inaccurate. So technically it is not admissible in court. Will it be in my lifetime? I don't know. Technology is always getting better and better, and they would have to prove that though through the legal system that it's super accurate, that the results could be relied upon. But it's not like a fingerprint. Fingerprints are pretty, or DNA or something like that. I mean, people can affect their blood pressure and their breathing. Good liars can do that, right? Or if you're just naturally over anxious, maybe you would give a false positive. Your heart is racing a lot, and maybe that would show up on the polygraph. But when I was looking at this question, I did find out there are some states that allow polygraphs to come in, but it's usually by agreement. So I just couldn't think of any way why, if you had a negative polygraph against you, why you would agree to let it come into court. But
yeah,
but
I think we were talking before, and you said that the police employ polygraphs all the time, but they have a different burden of proof than like courts do to get a court case.
Well, so two things. I actually have a friend of mine whose son was recently hired by a police department here in New Hampshire, and as part of the hiring requirement, they forced him to take a polygraph exam. So I don't know what type of questions they asked, so I thought that was kind of interesting. So sometimes as a requirement for employment, you could be required to do one. But once again, on the criminal side, while police are doing an investigation, I think, once again, this is something that's a little outside of my expertise, but my understanding is that when police are doing investigations, before it goes to court, sometimes they will do polygraph, ask people to submit to a polygraph to try to figure out, well, is this person, should they still be a suspect or not? So it helps them kind of funnel down a little bit their investigation and not have so many people.
Okay. Here's a question that, in fact, I had the brunch one time with a couple weeks back, and they said, if you're going to have a lawyer on, you may want to ask them this question. Did you ever have a client? Because you see all these movies like Guilty of Sin and Cape Fear, where the person who's being accused of something tells you the truth, and they are as guilty as sin. Yeah. And stuff like that. And they show you all these weird pictures of them doing weird stuff with the person they killed or raped or something like that, and stuff like that. Because you're not supposed to tell anybody about it because you're client attorney privilege and stuff like that. But did you ever have a client who pushed you to your moral and ethical limits and saying, why the hell am I, representing this person?
Well, once again, it's a good thing I don't do criminal law because it's I can see where you can sometimes get into some moral dilemmas like that. And I remember in law school asking my criminal law professor, what happens if somebody does that? And his answer simply was, well, I assume that they're innocent, and I treat them that way, and I defend them to the best of my ability. So I get it, I understand it. But as far as me personally, I view contracts and contract law as really amoral. In other words, not moral or immoral, they're just amoral. And what I mean by that is that a contract is just something that it's what you bargain for. Someone agrees to do something in exchange for someone else doing something. So the bank is agreeing to lend you money and you're agreeing to pay it back. Very simple process. And as long as it's not, with misrepresentation or fraud or duress or something crazy like that, forcing you to sign on the dotted line, I view them as being amoral, not neither moral or immoral. So I have a couple things that come to mind. I'll tell you one quick story. I had a case recently where what looked to be a simple case, it was a lease of a piece of equipment. And so we filed suit, and we getting ready for trial. We're doing what's called discovery. We're exchanging documents. We're answering interrogatories and questions that we have for each other about each other's case. And I talked to the attorney. He was a very well-respected attorney. And he's like, Tom, this machine, it was defective. They had problems with the machine. So when I'm looking at my contract and my invoices, I can't see that. It doesn't show up. I tell people a lot that I live in a black and white world. It's very black and white. You're supposed to pay this amount over this period of time. So as I started getting into the documents more and more, I was talking it over with my client. Was there problems with the machine? Yeah, we sent a guy out a couple times to try to fix it, and it looked like it was fixed, and then they said it wasn't working. But we don't think they're telling the truth. I said, well, what do you mean by that? Well, we just think it was a way for them to try to get out of paying. And I say, well, here's some documentation that said that the machine didn't work. So I said, this is getting ready to go to trial, and I don't think you have a good case, because if your machine doesn't work, you're in breach of the contract. You promised to give them a good working machine and to service that machine, and now you want me to try to collect the money that they were supposed to make on the lease. So after some back and forth, I'd like to say that common sense probably prevailed, and I convinced my client to take the machine back and drop the case. So I mean, maybe that's anticlimactic as far as what the outcome of it was. But was it moral or immoral? I don't know, but I think it was probably the right thing to do. I mean, we could have hashed it out as far as whether there was a case there, and then they really owed some money, and were they lying when they said it didn't work? I don't know. I don't think they were lying, so I think that it was probably better that case kind of go away.
Okay.
And if you got a minute, I got another quick story.
Sure.
I got another quick story. I had a case where it was a car loan, and the grandmother co-signed for the grandson. And of course, it was grandson's pickup truck is what it was. And grandson defaults on it, and my client financed the truck and hired me to collect the rest of it. So of course, wouldn't you know, the only person we could find was grandma, who's like 70 whatever years old and has no ability to pay. And the only reason she co-signed it was because she was trying to help her grandson. Well, the sad part of the story is that the grandson, I think, got into drugs and took off. No one knew where he was. So I went to my client, and I met with a lady at a pretrial conference, I think it was, and I got her story, and she's like, crying and telling me all the terrible things. The grandson had actually did a lot of damage to the family unit, stealing stuff and whatever. So I went back to my client, who's a big institutional client, and I'm like, you know what? That lady is legally obligated to pay that debt. She co-signed the loan. But I said, I think you should just let her off the hook. I think she suffered enough. She doesn't have an ability to pay really. She doesn't have any assets. let's let her off the hook. Let's not go after her for the payments, and then we'll see if we can find grandson some other day. So I'd like to say there, even in that story, common sense prevailed a little bit. The poor grandma, she really didn't have an ability to pay, and she already had suffered quite a little bit from her trying to help her grandson. So
Yeah. Okay, so one question I definitely want to get to before this episode expires.
yeah,
Okay, so hypothetically speaking, I know a little bit about small claims court. I love Judge Judy. If I wasn't here right now interviewing you, I'd be watching the Judge Judy show on my TV. So hypothetically speaking, if a person won a judgment off somebody, let's say for $3,000 in small claims, and the defendant chose not to pay it back, so if the person owns a house or a condo, can they take the judgment from small claims and use that against them on a lien, a property lien against their house or condo?
yes, absolutely. And I'll brag here a little bit because the senior partner, Jay Niederman, from my office, he actually helped streamline and helped draft the legislation that made this possible just a few years ago. So there used to be a longer way of getting a lien put on a piece of property. And thanks to the efforts of Attorney Niederman, we were able to change it to what it is in a lot of other states. And that is if you get a certified copy of the judgment from the court, and all that is a copy of the judgment with a raised seal on it from the clerk. You can bring that to the Registry of Deeds, and for a fee, I forget exactly what the fee is, but it's not a lot, $15, $20, something like that. You can record that judgment as a lien against whatever property that defendant owns in that county. So yeah.
So not necessarily a house or a condo, but if they own boats, snowmobiles.
No, this would just be for real estate.
Oh, just for real estate.
This would be
okay.
just be for real estate. So, yeah, anything at the registry would be for real estate.
Okay, the Registry of Deeds just for houses and condos and trailers and what you own for
Correct. So what that does is that puts a lien on the property. If they try to move, sell it to move or refinance it or whatever, they've got to talk to you. They've got to deal with that lien before they can sell the property and move to someplace warmer like Florida or something.
Okay.
But yeah, my Jay Niederman was the one that was able to help get that through the legislature several years ago.
And more often than not, the defendant in these small claims cases doesn't own. They're apartment dwellers, or they're probably living with their parents.
Well, welcome to my world. So this is what I do a lot. I do a lot of stuff in small claims court.
Okay.
And I do a lot of stuff in superior court. But the process is basically the same. If they don't own an asset like that where you can put a lien on it, and a lien is not instant money, so don't take that the wrong way either. I describe it to my clients as an insurance policy. It's something that's there that they have to take care of on an asset of theirs that they have to deal with if it goes up for sale. So on people that don't own real estate, most of the cases that I do, I bring them in to court on what's called a periodic payment hearing. And the New Hampshire statute on that is RSA 524:6A. And what that is that the court actually looks at the defendant's financial statement, and that could be just an affidavit that they fill out at court, and the court determines by looking at their assets, their income, and their expenses, what ability they have to pay. So generally in New Hampshire, if you're working, most judges will order you to pay something. So in some cases, $25 a month is appropriate. In some cases, $500 a month is appropriate. It's a case-by-case basis. So, and there's also a thing in New Hampshire, actually it's nationwide, but there's what's called exempt income. So if you know that a person is on Social Security or unemployment or certain types of pensions or whatnot, that income is what's called exempt. So the court can't order them to
Oh.
make payments out of it.
All right.
So if they're on Social Security or some sort of disability, you're probably out of luck as far as getting payments. So that's why sometimes I will get a lien if they own property, real estate. I'll get a lien and put the lien on and then kind of sit on it and see where the case goes, because the court won't order money payments out of it.
And also, if the person is like living with their parents, living in an apartment, going from job to job, 5, 6 years from now, their parents could pass away and they could inherit a house. So should they keep that judgment like in a file? And if they hear about them inheriting a house or hitting the lottery or something like that, bring that up again?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't remember the statute number exactly, but in New Hampshire, judgments are good for 20 years, which is a long time. Most of the states in the Northeast here are good for 20 years. So yeah, even though right now the judgment may not be worth anything to you, if they do win the lottery or get an inheritance or whatever, circumstances can change.
Yeah.
So you could bring people back in for a review hearing, or if you know that the asset, the house got transferred to that person, you could just go to the court, get a certified copy of the judgment, and have it recorded against that house. So it's a very easy process. The fee for a certified copy of judgment is $10, and then there's a fee at the registry to record it.
Well worth it if you're going to get like 3,000 or more.
Absolutely.
And also on Judge Judy, $5,000 is the limit. Then you'd have to go to like Superior Court or whatever.
Yeah, New Hampshire, for a while now, the limit in small claims court is $10,000.
Oh.
So yeah, you can go to small claims court for $10,000. I'll tell you that small claims court in New Hampshire can be a lot like Judge Judy. I call it your no-frills litigation. The poor district court judges have to deal with a lot of types of cases, sometimes squabbling neighbors or squabbling family members or whatever. And then you have attorneys like me in my office that we do file cases in small claims court because the fees are cheaper, and so we save our clients money that way. And the court also has a mediation program. So you can go and meet with a mediator, talk to people across the table, and try to work things out without a trial. And we find that to be very advantageous for what we do.
And also, in my experience, they're not quick. If you file for like a small claims, you're probably not going to be heard before like a magistrate or a judge till like 6, 7 months or more down the road.
Well, right now, there's very few courts in New Hampshire that are backlogged, which is a good thing. And so if you file a small claim and you get the defendant gets served, if they respond, you'll probably have a pretrial conference probably within 45 to 60 days.
Oh.
And that's just what it sounds like, pretrial. It's not a trial. And that's where they have the mediation, a mediator there, and you can meet for mediation. If you settle it at mediation, great. You write it up in an agreement, judgment for somebody for X amount. Maybe there's a payment plan involved, and the judge will sign off on it and make it an order. So it's just as if you had a trial. If you don't settle at mediation, then there could be depending on the court, could be a 2 or 3 or 4 month delay in getting scheduled for a trial to get in front of a judge. So if you can, so that's another incentive to try to settle at mediation, is that sometimes your case gets resolved a little quicker. So maybe a little bit of give on this side can start the payments coming in quicker. But sometimes both parties are at, I think I owe 0, and the other guy says, no, you owe me 10,000. There's no middle ground, so those are the cases that go to trial.
Okay. Now, getting back to like the cases of how do you make a will, and do you need a lawyer to close on a house? I was going to ask you a question about LegalZoom.com.
Yeah.
I hear that commercial all the time on TV. Does that help on like non-adversarial type matters in court? Or do you think I still like to have like a lawyer, asking my questions and giving me advice?
So my understanding is that like the documents that you can get on LegalZoom, and you have to purchase them. They don't give them away for free. My understanding is that they're very good. In other words, I told you about the Uniform Probate Code. Well,
Yeah.
so you have that. Most states have adopted that. You have the UCC, the Uniform Commercial Code. So a lot of states have adopted that. So there's a lot of states that do the same thing. And so these documents are made to basically cover what the majority of states require. So whether it's a will or whether it's creating a company or something like that, my understanding is that they're pretty good. I've never used them personally, and and sometimes some of this stuff like creating a company is some of the ones I've seen advertised. If you go on the Secretary of State's website, the forms are there too that you can just fill in on your own. The New Hampshire state forms are. On a related note on this one there is some talk in the legal community about outsourcing, and that's where lawyers that are trained in India or other countries work for, I think usually for big corporations or whatever, and they can review documents or do legal research or something like that. And so some of those things are being sent overseas to do that. Doesn't affect me at all because I've got to go to court. I have a hard time thinking that somebody from outside the United States is going to fly into New Hampshire to try to go
And you don't
go to
see
court.
LegalZoom.com or anything like that. It's ilk, knocking you into the unemployment line.
I don't think so. I mean, we're pretty specialized in what we do. There's a lot of hands-on stuff that I have to do to make my office successful. So I think whether it hurts other attorneys that maybe do wills or some other specialized things, I don't know for sure. But they probably take a little bit of business away. But as far as quantifying it, I really don't know.
Okay. One thing I want to bring up too, estate planning.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I guess it differs. Like if a person comes down with like dementia or Alzheimer's, usually it's over. You notice it over a period of years, and you can kind of plan for it. But does like Medicaid or Medicare, you got a couple that has their house on like a joint tenant deed.
Yeah.
And let's say the wife has to go in the nursing home, let's say in 2 or 3 years. Is there any way to like finagle the finances where the husband, if he's a survivor of his wife going in the nursing home, that he's not going to have to lose his house because to pay for his wife's nursing home care?
Well, that is something that you should definitely consult an expert in elder law care or whatnot. That's something that I don't specialize in. I do have some general knowledge about it. There are a lot of deadlines and a lot of thresholds that you have to keep in mind. And I don't know all the specifics of that, but I do know one of the big ones is that there is a 5-year look-back period. And what that means is that anything that you do, the government can look back 5 years, and if they don't like how you did it or if it doesn't follow within the certain standards that they've set up, they can undo it and actually treat it as if it didn't happen. So you need to be very careful about that when transferring assets. So that's why you absolutely need to go speak to a professional about that. And you don't want to miss any deadlines. I know, I do know enough that people are encouraged, if they have a lot of assets, you can gift away some of these assets to help in your estate planning. But once again, you don't want to break these thresholds that get you into trouble or trigger some sort of tax consequence or something like that. So I know that's not a very specific answer, but yeah, if you've got significant assets and that's something that you're worried about, you should go talk to somebody who specializes in that.
Yeah, that's probably for the best. Wow, so time flies when you're having fun, eh, Tom?
It sure does.
My producer told me we got, about 3 minutes or so left in this episode. Is there anything we've talked about which you'd like to elaborate on, or something we have not talked about which you'd like to bring up at this time?
Well, I know that it's being a contract law attorney is not very exciting, especially one that does collections. But the way I explain it to people is a pretty simple process. I view we're a capitalistic society. We rely on capitalism for our economy and for our country in a lot of different ways. So in some small way, I view enforcing these contracts, making sure people are following the terms of what they agreed to. I view it as helping a little bit, trying to keep the American economy in place, because we rely on those contracts, and people need to keep up on their promises, and if they don't, there can be consequences for that. So I like to think I have some small part in that. I know it's not very glamorous. I'm not going to be on Channel 9 News or anything like that. I'm not going to be breaking any new ground in the Supreme Court or anything. Contract law is pretty dry and pretty boring, but in some ways, it's been a really good experience for me. Not one that I thought I would specialize in maybe early on, but the Lord's been very good to me, and I've been very fortunate to be in the firm that I'm in, and I have a lot of great partners and a great senior partner that was a mentor to me, and taught me basically everything that I know.
Excellent, excellent. So, ladies and gentlemen, if this has been a blessing to you, and you're very interested in knowing a little bit more about Tom Walker and his law firm in Manchester, Niederman, Stanzel, and Lindsey PLLC, please, feel free to log on to nslnh.com. And Tom or one of his colleagues there can answer one of your questions, I'm sure.
Yeah, the website gives some background information for the law firm. I think there's some biographies on there as well. And there's a place where you can contact us and by email, especially if you have any questions.
Excellent. So with that in mind, I guess that's a show. That's a wrap, I guess. So
very good. Thank you, Frank.
Excellent. Oh, thank you for coming in and fulfilling one of my bucket lists to know the inner sanctum of the legal profession.
Well, hopefully I was of some help.
Yeah.
It's not always very glamorous, like I said, but it's an interesting career.
Okay. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for viewing here, and join us next time on Frankly Speaking. Thank you very much.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.